Hello my friends, I'm Rick and this is your seat at the table, and we are looking at a second edition's Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Player Handbook Rules Supplement, the Complete Fighter's Handbook. And this is supposed to be the end all, the beat all the information you'd ever need to know if you wanted to play the fighter class, and a number of variants and additional supplemental insurance rules. So we got things like crunch and additional crunch with a side of sweetened crunch. So that's how this is going to kind of play out, right? And workshop goes into the process of actually if you have a character who wants to craft their own armor, for example. This talks about the proficiencies needed, the workshop and the preparations required and things like this, and how to get to the outcome. Here's the cost to manufacturing armor, and then chances of failure, playing with the numbers, blah blah blah, apprentices and overseers, added expenses. So ideally, if you had a cavalier, for example, who's generally of the noble class, the cavalier is going to find himself going through lots of armor, and their armor taking a beating and needing repaired, and because of their appearance is a portion of what makes up a cavalier, they take that very intently. So part of their support team that generally is not talked about at the table would be that this minor noble or relative of noble has an estate someplace, and on that estate is a armory, an arms blacksmith or whatever, somebody who's capable of crafting and repairing armor and weapons. And so not only to maintain the defense for the defenses of the cavalier's estate, but anyway, so the same thing can play out for fighters, anybody of significant wealth. And if you go out on just one or two typical table-based adventures, suddenly the party is swimming in more wealth than they know what to do with in their entire existence. So it is what it is. And then other things like bow or fletcher, weaponsmithing. Then talks about weapon quality, monies and equipment, magic weapons. And then we'll go into more information on character creation, some adjustments and some additional things, kits and warriors. So things like, let's see, they could be the Amazon, the Ultimate Woman Warrior, the Barbarian, which I find is kind of odd that the Barbarian, which is an entire class of itself, which by rights the Amazon should also be in that Barbarian category, in my opinion. Maybe not, but the fact that the Barbarian is included as a playable subclass of the fighter is kind of different. And it actually tries to make the point that this is a different type of barbarian. This is not the barbarian of history, but the barbarian of fantasy fiction. He's a powerful warrior, so Conan the Barbarian potentially fits in the fighter class as well. The Beast Rider, Berserker, Cavalier. And if you don't know the difference between a cavalier and a paladin, it's well worth trying to get that established, because years and years and years ago, I don't know how many would-be paladins players who wanted to be paladins simply could not operate the character in the traditional concept idea of how a paladin should comport themselves and behave, and how they should be role played, if you will. And so that's why some classes and some races are more difficult to pull off for some people than they are for others. But in this case, so many people would actually want to play their paladin as if they were, more like a knight from King Arthur's court, which is fine, but that puts them in that category of a cavalier and not a paladin. And the differences are quite important, because cavaliers generally do not get the clerical spells, bonuses, and options that come with being a paladin, which is a knight of a church or champion of a church. So, right, I'm just saying. Gladiator, Mimeriadan. The Mimerian is the ultimate soldier, the soldiering his whole life. So ideally the soldier, which is there's a distinct difference between a fighter and a soldier, because a soldier has a lot more broader skills than just fighting, and they learn to fight in tandem with other people, generally as a team. They work better in groups than they do alone, as well. Whereas a fighter is the ultimate machine of combat. So, right, not necessarily a warrior, but there's distinct differences. Speaking of which, there's the noble warrior. The peasant hero. The pirate outlaw, the samurai. The savage. The swashbuckler, the wilderness warrior. So you see that they were trying to expand, trying to come up with some other specific pathways for characters to develop, for players to explore and to tweak with. And so when we had a character that's going to be a fighter, but he wants to be something that's just not just another fighter, so he wants to be a swashbuckler with all the flare and flash and stuff that entails. And as a character, as a player, the player is capable of pulling that off and sustaining it. Awesome. Because there's certain types of classes that are considered high energy, and if you have a lower energy player, portraying a high energy character generally becomes a very boring character, or a character that's lacking in the flash and flare that's often associated with its class type. But that's just a personal opinion, and however you guys project it in your own ways on you. We talk about things like warrior personalities, the brash youth, the crude crusher, the dangerous antagonist, the doomed champion, the natural leader, the merry show-off, the faded philosopher, changing personality types, warrior campaigns, magical world versus non-magical world, mostly non-magical world, magical world, strictly non-magical world. Yeah, just some options for setting the sandbox. Barbarians and berserkers, Amazons, one warrior type campaign where everybody is the same. You know, everybody is a cavalier. However that would play out. So, alright, it all rocks back down through everybody the same way. Campaign versus mini-series. How to tell the difference, how to switch between them. New combat rules, offhand weapon use, kneeling and sitting, range and initiative. Weapon proficiency slots, intelligence and proficiency, single weapon proficiencies, weapon group, proficiency type groups, broad groups. You start breaking down how you can become a specialist with a specialist. You want to master the rapier and then become a master of that, then you could in theory do that, which means if you pick up a saber and you're a master of the specific sword and type of sword and style, and you try to use something that's not, you generally not only are at a negative, but you have additional penalties for doing so. I mean, it's just but for the one who masters the master, you become the most proficient swordsman out there with use of a saber. Then that saber is going to be your primary weapon at all times, unless somehow you get disarmed or you lose it, right? But you don't need me telling you that. You already know all that stuff. Limitations in style. And we get combat rules, sample, see, 2-weapon style. Called shots, striking a specific body part, smashing something being held, bypassing armor. Special results, disarm versus two-handed weapons, disarm versus shields. Expert disarms a grabbing a person, grabbing a monster. The hold attack, choice of parries, polearm parries, various advantages, pin, pole, trip, use of polearms. Sap, shield punch, shield rush, strike thrust, don't say no, determine the difficulty, surprise and flash maneuvers. what to do when your players decide to go all Monte Hall or all Crazy Town, you know, all Mel Gibson. Yes, never know what's going to happen. Martial art results. You know, here's a martial arts maneuver from head punch to low kicks to knee shots to vital punches. Complete martial artists, barehanded maneuvers, called shots punching, called shots wrestling, specific stuff. You know, there's a lot of secondary optional rules as far as I'm concerned. Now we get into some more exotic weapons, nets, lassos, bolas. This was something because I always would, every now and then we get a character, we get a player, or it would be me, and I would want to try something exotic. I would want to have my version of Indiana Jones rogue, you know, with a nice long bullwhip and figure out creative ways to use it and put to use. So I mean, yeah, you wonder where and why the sheer amount of rules are available for any tabletop fantasy role-playing game, or any role-playing game in general, and why so many carry over and share similarities. I mean, it's because of the sheer amount of stuff that was created 30 years ago, 25 years ago, and from that that mountain becomes a palace in a lot of people's eyes. You know, it is what it is. Anyway, until next time, I hope you guys have a great weekend.